Welcome, everyone. We're delighted to be here with Petra Kuppers, who is going to begin our conversation about her work and about a larger poetic practice by leading us in a meditation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody who's here. It's beautiful to be in this gorgeous assemblage of people. I'm so delighted with who turned up here. So yay. And yeah, I'm Petra, she, her. I am a white cis queer woman who's sitting in front of a pink background. I have very short silverish hair. I have yellow glasses, and I'm wearing, because of the day that it is, I'm wearing some very lovely rejuvenatory 1980s pink lipstick that goes with the walls and also just flashes out into the world in a spring fashion. And I come to you from Anishinaabe territory, which is colonially known as Ypsilanti, Michigan. So we are indeed here welcoming spring. So yes, thank you. That lipstick is, I love this lipstick too. And yeah, just my wife, Stephanie Haidt, who's here and who's my collaborator and a poet and a dancer. We were just out by the river here, writing by the river. And I'd love to gift you some of the energy that we were engaging with, the river flowing by, the sun beating down on us, just while it's still like only 50 degrees, but the sun was out and beautiful. So we were re-entering into writing practice by the river. So in that spirit, I'm coming to you right now. So today, as our meditation, I will take you on a little journey, if you're up for that. And it's a journey into the materials that surround us, the materials that we live with, which are sort of at the heart of Ecosoma, the new book that just came out. It just came out at the end of February, so I'm still in that first flush of my book tour. I'm having a wonderful time going around and engaging with people about this work that looks at how we are embedded in the world. So join me for this. So right now I invite you to make yourself a comfy nest. We're going to do this just for a few minutes. So get very comfortable, just where you are right now. And I invite you to take a breath with me. And to just feel what is supporting you right now. You might be standing or moving. You might be lying down. You might be sitting down. All of that is completely welcome. So just feel into what is supporting you and holding you on this earth right now. It could be what is beneath your butt, beneath your thighs, behind your back, or just beneath the soles of your feet, depending on how you are oriented in the world right now. Just breathe and feel that you are indeed touching the earth, that you are held in place, that something is cradling you. And with the next breath, just give yourself a little bit more to that which is cradling you, which is touching you. And feel what we don't normally feel, right? Like below our thighs, the small of our back. Just feel and welcome that support. That very baseline, impersonal support that we can touch in with in any position we are in. And then if this is accessible to you, use your fingertips. If you're not on screen, you can also use your tongue, whatever is nice and sensitive right now. Use something nice and sensitive to feel what that material is that you are sitting on, standing on, moving on, lying on. Just feel it. You can keep your eyes closed or have them open, whatever works well for you. But you're just touching in with that material. What is it? What is this material? I'm sitting here on a red leather couch. What are you sitting on, standing on, or lying on right now? What is beneath your fingers? Right next to me is a beautiful fluffy blanket. And it's a plastic blanket. It's very soft and fleecy. So just touch what you have near you and begin to give yourself to that material and its journey. Now, some of us might be sitting on, standing on, or lying on something that we know, the journey of which we know. Maybe you are on something that your mother made. Maybe you are on something that someone in your family constructed out of wood, out of a tree that it could be that. But for many of us in the global north, that is often not the case. We're often not sitting on, lying on, or standing on material that we know, that we've seen in its multiple journey stages. So, just become aware of where this comes from. How did you encounter it? How did it encounter you? How did you become entangled with this material? So that is something that is just within your own biography. And then we're going to go back further. So some of us, probably quite a few of us, are sitting on something that might have plastic in it, on it, around it. So let's for a second cast back to the history of that plastic. And it is, for some, a holiday called Easter and a holiday of resurrection. So we're going to track a resurrection narrative here as we go all the way back to a dinosaur, or maybe just a small creature or a tree, an old tree or a fern, maybe an ancient, huge fern. And this dinosaur or this fern was hanging out by a shallow sea. And then it fell. The dinosaur, the fern, fell into the sea and got covered by water. And then it sank to the bottom. So sink with that dinosaur to the bottom of a shallow sea. And then there's time, and then there's time, and then there's sedimentation and sand and more sand and rocks and sand and pressure. So much pressure on that dinosaur deep at the bottom of the shallow lake. And the pressure runs and multiplies and becomes more and more and more. And the fern and the dinosaur are transforming into oil and coal, a new kind of being. And still everything sediments, becomes rock hard, rises up, rears up into mountains. And now it is so much later, so much later, and there's pressure again, and then there is a moment of release. And depending on where you are in the world, that release might look really different. If you're in Canada, maybe you're thinking of oil sands. If you are in coastal regions, maybe you're thinking about drilling platforms. There's many different ways in which humans access oil and resurrect the dinosaur. And there's so many different stories that happen around that. Stories of toxic load on lands, impact on marine mammals, on coastal birds. But right now, you can also visit with the worker on the oil platform, drilling down. You can visit with the environmentalist on the coast that's using soap to clean up a bird. Maybe you are with the workers who are assembling a pipeline. Maybe you are with the protesters in the camp behind the wire fence, protesting the pipeline. Just track all the many people who are part of this long chain. Someone who drives the train or the truck. Someone who lives in the toxic fields. Just track the many, many people, non-people, humans, non-human others that are touched before that oil, the old dinosaur, moves into the refinery. And here are the refinery workers. And here we are in the refinery tanks. And here the oil shifts into its different phases, and one of which is naphtha, that thick sludge of naphtha, raw oil, becomes all of these different processes, different materials. And then there are these pale white pieces of plastic beads. And then we are with the workers in the factory who are shaping these into the kind of plastic that's touching you right now. And as you're moving along that chain, give honor, track your feelings, track what comes across your sensory screen, wonder, gratitude, guilt, joy. You're just tracking it. You don't have to hold on to any of it. You're tracking how these materials touch you until you're back where we are right now, where we are sitting or standing or lying, where we are touching these materials that surround us and that we are in relationship with, that we are entangled with. And the last breath, as you're acknowledging the material in touch with your skin. Thank you. And I'll take a second and feel free to jot down something. If you like to jot something into the chat, if there's a word, a phrase that you like to share, please feel free. I will read out if anything comes up in the chat. Or you might just want to write down something in private. If there was an insight or an emotion, a sensation that you want to hold on to, an image, a color, a message. All right. Okay, and now we can enter into our conversation.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, Petra. And I have to say that, there was just this overwhelming grief that I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting to track that journey, the way that you guided us from the initial, like touching this fabric of this chair that I'm sitting on, and the kind of erotics of that, and erotics in that sort of sensory, like it's very tactile, it's very pleasant, and there's a kind of, like an erotics to that, and then to move all the way through that journey and to be, I was actually like, I frequently leak water while meditating. So I was actually felt this grief, and then to also come back to that tactile sensation, and to remember and to still sense the sort of erotics that is within that tactile sensation of my flesh against this fabric that came from another creature, another being, right?
Mhm.
And also to realize how profound it is that everything in this world, on the outside of this world, is made from that which is inside, right?
Yeah.
And so thank you for that. And I'd love to, kind of move from there into, talking about, like, I asked you to give a longer meditation as a way to get at this thing that you write about in your book, Eco-Soma, Pain and Joy in Speculative Performance. And that eco and soma are two words which you write about in the introduction, and you distinguish this also from ecosomatics as one word. And I'd love to, have you talk a little bit about that as a
Thank
place
you.
to launch. Yeah.
It's beautiful. And I love what's coming up in the chat, and maybe later we'll turn to that a bit. But yes, these so I think a lot of the writing of Eco-Soma was about touching with these very conflicting and rich and sensual, erotic emotions, sensations, and entanglement that shape my life and shape the life of many people that I'm in contact with, and that are hard to capture in language, right? So it's like there's so much interest in the somatic, and there's also interest in the political of somatics, but there's less of that, the kind of the grief, the being with the entanglement, and the complexity of emotions that come up when we're engaged in somatic work. I was looking to find a place for that. I was looking to find a place to really articulate that, sit with that, to not just think about somatics as something that was happening within my own skin sac, skin sac, but in ethical touch with the world, both the non-human, more than human world, and the human world, the kind of made world. So another kind of meditation. I mean, even in this meditation, we were thinking about the relative difference of who might be living in these toxic zones. If I would have gone down the route of wool, in the winter, I often take this meditation down to wool, and we might be thinking about terraforming and how certain Pacific Island nations water tables were decimated because of the phosphor industry, and the way that the phosphates were extracted from the lands in order to create sheep rearing opportunities in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Australia. I mean, just like really interesting ways in which material flows that are not easily accessible and aware, whereas cotton and the extraction industries and the social injustices around cotton are more available in the US context than, say, for instance, the sheep stories and what's going on there. So I find it really interesting to track many different kinds of stories of that nature, to really become aware of what the socio-historical and cultural implications of our materials are, as well as the actual material implications, and how for instance, oil affects our world. So tracking these, becoming more aware, giving us more space to be with, is at the heart of Eco-Soma. And it's ecosomatic indeed feels, I mean, it's interesting to try to come up with definitions for ecosomatic. Ecosoma. And I don't know. I don't really know what the real distinction is, whether there is one. But what fascinated me was that eco-soma are these two words, right? So there's eco and soma, and I'm thinking of them like how a pearl is made, that there is an irritant. So there's two, and they are in a stumbling relationship with one another. If I'm thinking about the environment, I'm not usually thinking about my embodiment. If I'm thinking about my embodiment, I can be very much within myself. I'm not often thinking about the outsides. So thinking about the two together gets us into this really interesting stumbling relationship, and into a kind of waltz, like this movement, this kind of off-centered movement. And when I mentioned the pearl earlier, I'm thinking about, here I am sitting with my plastic blanket, right? And I'm thinking about what this does to the guts of a fish, like how when I wash this, how all these little fibers get into the waterways. And thinking about that acts like an oyster irritant, like this little something that gets into the oyster, and that creates this pearlescent accretion around it, which eventually becomes the pearl. So most of the moments in Ecosoma I think of as these pearl moments, where something irritant creates this kind of a new kind of beauty, a beauty that requires us to think about pain and joy together. Yeah, so that's...
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, it's also pain and joy together, but also the way that it's not putting those as necessarily in a binary together, right? It's more about opening up this other kind of liminal space. It's striking to me that like in a kind of neoliberal discourse, like, okay, let's meditate and like get grounded, and which I love, but like, let's meditate as a way to like, a kind of self-help discourse that can help it happen, right? And whereas meditation is also, it's not just about, it's actually a way of like knowing and coming into more mindfulness. And so that you're using the meditation structure to also come into this more mindfulness about tracing these histories that a lot of us kind of know, but don't want to know necessarily, because they're so upsetting. And it's not trying to resolve that upset, but it's also not trying to guilt that upset. It's not trying to, it's not saying, let's all go throw away or get rid of our, plastic blankets, right? So that's really interesting. And I guess I would love to hear, I would love to have you talk a little bit more about how you, like the kind of how joy comes into your work. As I was preparing for this talk today, I was talking to my sweetie who was like, oh, it sounds very heavy. And I'm like, it is very heavy. But Petra has this interesting way of like, it is very heavy. It's like, our lives actually depend on this. And yet at the same time, there is this kind of joy, which is a different experience than, I don't know. I'm trying to, joy is exactly the right word, but I'd love to hear, so joy in terms of your practice.
Right, thank you. Yes, I think joy is central to this work. So is critique, so critique and joy and pain all are together. I live in pain, so I live in actual physical pain. I am a disabled performance practitioner. My work has always been grounded in pain and in the necessity of working with and being with the pain, so, and the pain can be my own physical, spiritual, psychical pain. And it can also be, and often is, the pain of what it means to live in an unjust world. So how to live through that and find these moments of being with, and attentiveness is central to finding joy. So the art practice allows me, and I also would say allows people who work with me and people who move on with that work to find these moments of collaboration, moments of connection, and that includes the connection with the blanket, right? With the non-human others, these moments of sensory richness. So that is for me one of the core elements of the experience of joy, is to be with and to be in sensory rich connection that doesn't cut off any of the emotions that are part of the encounter, and that explores the richness of the fact that we have sensations. There isn't a sensation, and that grief is a sensation. That grief worked with and being with and sat with is for me a more joyful experience than the kind of the shutting away, the kind of not looking at how the world that we live in came to be, and how and what kind of mechanisms are at work in the world in which we're in. So, and just as so many objects hold tears and hold pain and hold blood, so do these objects and relations hold survival and survivance and ongoingness and memory. So I think those mechanisms are in contact with one another, and that's what I find one of the sources of joy as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about with the emotions. At one point during the meditation, you said, to notice the emotions and to let them let them be, which is different than identifying with them, right? And I think that I'm sort of thinking about this difference between identifying with something and being entangled, and do you know Karen Barad's work? Like,
yes.
Does Barad's? I also feel like, I feel like this, because they write so much about this kind of like the entanglement of everything, right? But is their work also informing your work and?
Yes, sure. Yes, indeed it does. And so does a lot of critical animal studies, critical material work of all kinds. So yes, that's kind of very deeply informs ecosoma and the kind of analysis, so it's the work that's happening in the chapters. I did put the first chapter kind of intro into the chat as well, if people want to have a look at it, because it delights me that I can make it available for free. It's an open access book, which is fabulous. So thinking again about the materialities and how material access and economic access is part of a socially just way of being a writer and thinker in the world is really rich to me. So I just still am absolutely delighted that I can actually legitimately just hand it out to everybody. That's kind of the point of the book. But yes, these notions of complex entanglement, and that include emotional, material, and also spiritual realms, are really central to the work. So I use the word body, mind, spirit as a way of capturing of what of the kind of entities that I'm intrigued to see in performance. I'm in the book, I'm constantly going to different kinds of performances that are not ones that I'm familiar with often. They're not like all out of the traditions that I embrace, that are my own performance traditions. So I'm often in environments that are hosted by different performance practitioners, and I'm sitting with what I know and what I don't know. I'm sitting with the fact that spirit is moving, that I know and I don't know, so like I am enjoying those openings, because they allow us to move our projects forward. So they're not all performances that are only in a particular narrow framework of disability culture. I don't know what narrow framework that is. It's actually a pretty wide framework, but you know what I mean. It's not just, not everybody identifies around disability. Instead, I find myself in very different kinds of performance spaces. I'm also looking at a lot of performances that are on different kinds of media, because so much, particularly now as we're moving through the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic, we find ourselves so often in need of using digital media to communicate with one another. So I'm trying to put a lot of emphasis on material that one can access, that are kind of out there, like on Vimeo or YouTube or whatever. So there's a lot of connections like that that become available, that always foreground material practice. And rather than some sort of idea that there's some performances out in New York City that you have to have seen in order to be able to access what I'm talking about. That's not the case. These are mainly performances by people who you might never have heard of. It's very likely that you've heard of hardly anybody in the book, because so many are community performance practitioners or people who work in small local environments and who then use different kinds of media to connect with audiences. So all these things are really central to what I do. Very different kinds of and scales of entanglement.
Yeah. So as you're talking, it's like 5 different questions come up, and then you'll finish, and I'm like, okay. So So it sounds like you have an ongoing practice of also, I mean, and I, of sort of being curious and seeking out performances that you wouldn't necessarily, that you're just letting your curiosity go into other places outside of your known community, correct?
Oh yeah, like I'm suddenly become someone who's going to a lot of puppet theater for some reason. It's kind of
So it's like letting yourself, yeah. So I love that. And also, and then also using, there's a lot of documentation in the book, but also just knowing you. I mean, the most recent time that we actually saw each other in person, it was doing a turtle disco. You and Stephanie came down to Florida, and we had a turtle disco in where were we again? In
Jupiter, right? Weren't we off
Jupiter and
Jupiter Beach.
Fort Pierce, yeah.
Yeah, very cool.
So, but again, it was this a beautiful encounter, and where we all got to know each other. It wasn't, it's like it can continue on, but the point is actually about, it felt to me like the point is much more about being present with each other and with ourselves in that moment.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yes, exactly. And with whom we are. So we spend a lot of time, if you remember, just checking in with one another, right? And finding out something about our lives. Like we didn't just go in and do stuff. There's a lot of like also sitting with and getting a bit of a sense of who we are and how our lives are running. And then we drift, right? So drifting is this core modality that we've used in that workshop as well. So we're just paying attention. We're becoming sensate surfaces that take in so much, and including taking in things that we don't know. So like often when I'm, for instance, in a black framed environment, which of course is very often the case here in Detroit. We live half an hour away from Detroit, and really try to make sure that we don't just go to white frame performances. When I'm going to Buto performances, when I'm going to what else? Indigenous framed performances. There's work that I recognize, and then there's also these lacunae, these spaces that I know I don't know. I don't know exactly what's going on. I'm really interested in leaning into those kinds of spaces and figuring out what it means to be respectfully in the open, not and knowing that other information will come in that I will not be in charge of. I will not corral. I will not territorialize. It will not be mine to own as knowledge. So what does it mean to be this kind of seeking, open, antennae out performance practitioner and witness in the world? That's kind of what's going on in a lot of these performances. And I remember we were doing that when we were at Jupiter as well, when we were visiting our different creative spaces, right? We created our ideal, what the next project might look like spatially, something like that.
These little installations. So so I would love to have us do, well, let's see what I'm looking at time. So I would love to have us do a short drift together. If you have a poem to share that we could actually like do a drift with, that would be fantastic.
I would love that. Absolutely. Let's do this. So this is from my dear gut botany. So you can see drifting, right? So here, look at this beautiful sturgeon on the cover, right? So I often in poetry sessions, I spend time with people to looking at this image and just analyze together what's going on there. What is this sturgeon, this ancient fish that's drifting at the bottom of lakes and oceans and survives? But I'm going to read now a poem called House Concert. And while I'm reading that, I have a little instruction for you all. If you're up for this. So this last time I asked you to kind of really sit and sink into your seat. And this time I ask you to drift around your space, to just move, to get up if that feels comfortable to you and if it's accessible to you, and to just move across your room and see what's there to be seen. Look at it. while you're listening to me reading. So the poem is a drifting poem. It's created out of that kind of practice where we drift. And I'd love it to invite you to receive it in that way. So you're not going to miss anything. Oh yeah, one more thing, maybe like the site where it was. The site was the Lightbox, which was an artist space in Detroit. It doesn't exist anymore now after the pandemic, but it was a former Baptist church as well as a bank. So you get these images of both church and bank in there. So people, just enjoy a happy drift around your space and look at what comes to you, know what calls to you, what draws your attention. Enjoy. House concert. Upon performing at Lightbox Artist Space, Detroit, a former Baptist church and bank. What hides under the chairs? What sighs under the upholstery? Dark forest green moans Gothic attic theaters of smooth gray stage floor, shiny, kick the red brick. Burnhole into the past snags a tiny hair. Girls rock, end of camp showcase. The prophetess sings in the church, hands point skyward, fingertips in the clouds, feet in the old vault, tucked away in a box of earth at night. The window under the arches is blocked up. No Detroit brick to sail right through, river right over the wailed sound of authenticity. There, a shark takes a bite out of the flocked asbestos. Intestine wires loop inward, rivets high up the wall, pop the screw, and my hip hurts in the decade's damp. Today is your day, she sings. Her hair weaves into the radiator. The pavement cracks, amplifier, microphone, floor cushion. The empty roll awaits your feet. German Shepherd mix barks at the cri de coeur, at the wailing wall, at the unicorn hair. Just take it to the bank. Just take it to the church. Suburban lights mirror ball shootout. The hole in the wall patched up for the camera, for the city inspector decommissions the carpet choir stalls, bricolage living on the liminal riot weed edge. The prophetess leans into you. Her skin is warm. Her belly peeks beneath moss green sweater. Navel opens into another world. Everything you feel is appropriate. The theater anthropologist, in her Sun Ra door blinds, sachets across the ceiling tiles, scattered by a hurricane. Ride the inverse ocean. Another brick in the sea anemone blossoms on the radiator mesh. The prophetess is alone on the street corner. Cars drive by. Chain link fence cracks in the winter wind. Thank you. All right, dear people. And if we have a little minute, I would love to know what objects you might have encountered. So if you feel up for it, write something about what you encountered. What did you feel and find in your own space? Just give us a little description of an object that you found. Just put it in the chat.
While we're waiting for people to put those in the chat, and also if anyone has questions, you can feel free to put those in the chat too. But I wanted to say it was so interesting. I wasn't able to like move because I'm connected to the computer and hosting. But when I would be focused on objects, which I was noticing very minute, like very particular details of fabrics around, I would hear different aspects of the poem more sharply. And I noticed I was letting myself have this experience of sound and sight together, and letting go of trying to have to understand the poem or hear what was the poem trying to say. So it was interesting. And then when I would sort of then I would feel my mind trying to grasp on like, but wait, what is this? And then when I could relax into my other senses, I could let the poem I could be there with the poem in a different way and let go of understanding.
That's
So
nice. I'm glad. Yay, exactly. And look what people found. TV antennae out the window, a neighbor's roof, a soft pair of pants, old boots, now home to intricate spiders' webs. Wow, cool. Good find. Gum. The spider plants are being nonchalantly spiderly with the orchids that drape above them. The paperwork is calling for their tree forms. Oh, Brenda, that's lovely. And Nina, I've been contemplating, celebrating, acknowledging my ancestors by looking at the garments that were given to me. Oh, wow, people. Gorgeous. Thank you. Yeah. See this way. So, oh, there's one more, Danielle. Various textured rocks, remembering their origin, collection sites. Oh, great. That's lovely. See how these things connect back together? We're still fully in that multisensory opening to the world. It makes for such a richer world. It makes for such a stronger embedment in our world when we pay that attention, and when poetic practice becomes poetic sensing rather than my poem. I love that.
yeah, and I think that that's also where this beautiful kind of world building utopian vision comes in too. You know, this idea of using the imagination, or the possibilities for using the imagination and using these other ways of knowing to think about how we really want to, or to shift how we are entangled. You know, by first noticing some of the entanglements that we have, but then also what do we want our world to be, you know? And so much is also already here. So it's like, it's providing, to me, I feel like there's this way where it's providing this experience to actually notice that maybe there's a beautiful utopia already present.
Yeah, I love that. That's interesting. And the utopia that already has is living in dystopia, right? So
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yes, I think that's really interesting. I'm one of my inspirations. There's many inspirations. One is a recent text I absolutely love is Alexis Pauline Gumb's M Archive.
Yes.
Which is this kind of utopia, dystopia, you know, the life after the apocalypse in deep material engagement with a new kind of world that comes into being. And the other one would be Donna Haraway's and the 8th chapter in Staying with the Trouble. So the 8th chapter is the creative writing chapter, the one about the children of the compost, the story of Camille. You know, some of you know this book. It's a story of a few, you know, like the notion is that after the apocalypse, after the catastrophe, and of course for many people it's been around for quite a while, people find themselves in smaller groups, like a few hundred people each, or even smaller than that, and are finding new ways of moving forward together. And so one of the ways they're finding their way forward is to merge themselves with other endangered species. So the story of Camille is the story of emerging with monarch butterflies. And you might remember that Donna Haraway is a science writer, right? So she actually takes us through the potentials of what these multiple generations of mergers with butterflies might mean for human sensorium, might mean for being with one another in a much more entangled way than one would normally think of, right? So there's this deep entanglement at the level of DNA, and it's a fascinating read, and it's something that I found so inspiring for my own practice as I was trying to figure out at a certain point, well, what does it mean to be to live up more specifically to the ethical demands of the world we live in right now. So Stephanie, my wife, and I, Stephanie Height, and I, we created Turtle Disco as a local place, you know, a local place of this, the same kind of notion of a small local community that can be an artful practice together in one space and create new forms of community together. So that's the utopian dystopian, the kind of in-between space that I'm intrigued by, both as a conceptual practice, but also as an actual lived experience.
Petra, I feel like I have like 15 other questions for you. And I am also mindful of time. And usually we end this conversation with pulling a card. But as you were just speaking, I actually called to mind the card that you pulled right before we came. And so maybe that's actually our card, which is a message for the community. So it's this sort of a card that you're speaking about this monarch butterfly and the merging, and then we have this card that that was pulled. And this is, tell us again what deck this is from.
Yes, so this is the Daughters of the Moon deck by Fiona Morgan, which is a really old deck. It's like an 80s deck. Oh, great. Oh, lovely. I'm so glad you know this one. So it's a goddess deck. It's like there's no male figures in this at all. It's multiple kinds of women for different shapes and sizes and racialized backgrounds. And just it's definitely a utopian deck. It's a utopian deck. So it's very yeah, I enjoyed it. It was gifted to me, as it should, right? As it was part of a giveaway at the end of a weekend of co-dreaming, where I was dreaming with other people in journeying work. And so this is the one that we pulled earlier, and it's the what was it?
It's the maiden. It was the Maiden of Blades, right?
That's right. So, it's the Maiden of Blades.
Yeah,
because there aren't any knights or kings or anything like that, so they're all like these female figures. And so this maiden travels with around communication. It's basically similar to a knight or the fool. It's like the first character, the youth, the moment of youth, the moment of springing forth again, which of course fits really nicely with spring and the period that we're in right now. There's definitely the butterfly, the monarch butterfly going on.
Yeah. And what's the word on the bottom? Is that the planet?
It's Hina. That's the name of the maiden. Hina. Yeah.
Okay. So and Sila's saying in the chat, this is the deck that Kristen uses. I was wondering, this is like Kristen Nelson's main deck, I believe, that she always pulls from, I think. Yes. Okay. Wow. I was wondering but I just wasn't, the way that Kristen describes it is a little bit different. But so that, and
she'll know more about it. Really, I'm not. It's not a core tool of mine. It's just like I looked around and I have these beautiful decks that I've been gifted and that I occasionally use, but I don't have no authority around this, but I just love the image.
But I feel like, so yeah, I don't know Hina either, but as I was, in terms of thinking about a message for the community, that's, the people that are here today, I do feel like this part of what this is asking us is, at the sort of beginning or in a maiden phase of things. So at the beginning of a transformation. So you've been maybe in a transformation, you've sprouted the new wings, but you haven't actually moved into the next, like the mother phase or into the crone phase. So you're still in that earlier phase. And like, where do you, this is a good space for like setting intentions, right? And for really, what do you need to leave behind in order to inhabit your next incarnation?
Sounds great. What do you take on the journey to mention so many different holidays that are going on right now, right?
Absolutely.
How do you nourish yourself? At what point do you nourish yourself? All these beautiful things. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we are at time. So thank you everyone so much for being here today. And thank you so much, Petra. This was such a gift and such a, this is exactly my kind of way to have a ritual and community space together. And I'm so grateful for you and for your work and your presence in the world. And thank you so much for everyone for being here.
Thank you so much. I had a wonderful time. I love the questions you asked. Thanks everybody for having me here. Shameka and Teresa, thank you. And it's so nice to see you all here. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.